Hi, I'm Mark. In this video, I'm going to show you how to test your lawnmower's spark plug. The spark plug creates the spark for combustion in your lawnmower's engine. It receives a high voltage charge from the ignition coil, and it uses that charge to create a spark between the electrodes. The spark plug will wear out over time and no longer create a spark. You should replace your spark plug at least once a year as part of your normal lawnmower maintenance. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can tell if your spark plug is bad. Testing a spark plug can be difficult because often it'll test good on the bench, but then when you install it in the mower under the high voltage conditions, you'll find out that it's bad. I'm going to show you a couple of ways you can test the spark plug, as well as a couple of tests you can do on your lawnmower to determine that the spark plug itself is bad and not other components. It's important that you test the spark plug on something non-conductive like a block of wood. If I test it on my metal workbench, I probably get a false reading. Before we test the spark plug, it's important to have an idea of how a spark plug works. Basically, a spark plug is divided into two halves, and each of those halves have an electrode. The metal portion of the plug and the top strap is one electrode, or one side of the plug. The second part is the small metal post extending out of the plug, that's one of the electrodes, and it's insulated from the rest of the spark plug by the ceramic insulator. The two halves of the plug must remain isolated from each other for the spark plug to work, and that's where most spark plug problems happen. Usually, the insulator will crack, and that'll allow that high voltage current to pass between the internal electrode and the outer electrode. There's two tests I can do with the multimeter to determine if the spark plug is bad. I've set the multimeter to measure ohms. First, I'm going to test for continuity in that internal electrode. I'll place one of the multimeter leads on the center electrode itself and the other end on the post on the opposite end of the spark plug. Because of oxidation and carbon buildup, sometimes you'll need to kind of rub the lead through that buildup to get a good reading. If the electrode is good, you'll see a reading on the multimeter. In this case, it's a fairly high reading, about 4,900 ohms, because this is a resistor type spark plug. They'll read higher than spark plugs without resistors. As long as you have some reading, you can assume that that electrode is good. The next test I'll do is to test between the two electrodes, or the two halves of the spark plug. This reading should be 0. This is testing for a damaged insulator. If I get a reading when I do this test, it would indicate that that insulator is cracked and voltage can leak through. Now this test doesn't always work because often it'll read good on the bench or a 0 reading, but when you install it in the lawnmower, that high voltage will leak through a tiny crack in the insulator and cause the plug to short out and not create a spark inside the combustion chamber. That's where we have to go to the mower and determine that the other components of the mower are good, which would indicate that the spark plug itself was bad. The way that I usually identify a bad spark plug is to use a spark tester. The spark tester doesn't test the spark plug itself, but it will test the rest of the mower's ignition system to tell us that that is working good. I'll remove the boot from the spark plug. I'll install the boot on the tester to the plug, and I'll install the other end of the tester to the lawnmower spark plug boot. If the ignition coil is working properly, we'll see a spark inside of the spark tester. Now I'll have producer Casey turn the lawnmower over by pulling the starter rope. We should see a spark in the spark tester, telling us that the ignition coil is working fine. If the lawnmower doesn't fire, that will indicate that the spark plug is bad.